Hey everyone, it's Taylorverse, and welcome back to Sin. We are starting on chapter 12 today. We've been approached by Durant Harding PLC with an offer for Alpha Publishing. We're obliged to consider this offer. We shouldn't have gone public when we did, I said to my father. We were all at a hastily arranged family dinner. Yes, well, Ruth, the board was very keen at the time. And even though I'm chairman, as our family contribution is minimal. You know, Father, I'd thought of trying to start a new publishing division at Alpha, perhaps in a few years' time when William is older. You've never mentioned this to me before. Perhaps I wanted to surprise you. That's something you have never found difficult, Ruth. We have our responsibilities to the company to consider. A kind of corporate noble ease. Oblige, is it, Father? In a way, yes. We're still the major shareholders, he continued, but it's the board's opinion that this is a serious offer and it must be taken to the other shareholders. I shall offer to resign as chairman. What will happen to Alpha if it accepts the offer? I asked. Well, it will still trade under the name, but it will be owned by Derwent's. It does mean that our titles will have greater development opportunities. It's a very good idea, really. Elizabeth, he turned to her, still in black, nearly 4 years later. I feel that whatever the board decides should be agreed by us. I've never made a contribution to Alpha. Your grandfather created the company. It wouldn't exist at all if were not for him. My mother interjected. Neither would we for that matter, I replied. Ruth, my father spoke almost sadly, you know, my dear, though I'm pleased you had the idea of a publishing division, it wouldn't have sat well with the magazines. I'm certain the board would have opposed it. It was finally agreed that the chairman of Derwent's would come to Lexington for lunch the following Saturday, in order to meet the family. The future of Alpha could be discussed in congenial surroundings. It's all agreed then. My father looked at each of us in turn. We nodded our consent. I shivered suddenly. Perhaps the veil of the angel wove had fluttered. Wooden doors opened from the main hall in Lexington into a large, high-ceilinged drawing room with an enormous French stone fireplace. On either side of the fireplace, two cushion-covered sofas face each other in military precision, as though standing guard over the low, almost black-green marble table. At each end of the room, two sets of wooden double doors can be glimpsed behind two exactly matching arrangements of tall-stemmed red roses standing on the round tables covered in tapestry. A number of black high-backed chairs with studded arms defy anyone to sit on them. Dark hangings on each side of the fireplace reflect, in their greenness, the distant view past the courtyard down to the park and the almost hidden lake. The walls between the French windows were bare except for the outer folds of heavy green velvet curtains. It is an austere, dark room. A small sitting-room library opens off the north end of the main room. It is used for cards, chess, and reading. The dining room, with its long, dark mahogany table, silver candlesticks, and one huge religious painting, is a room which could easily have been a chapel. All the rooms are a study in darkness. Though the French windows imply a welcome, somehow the light stays politely away. It was through these rooms that Sir Charles Harding followed my father into our lives. He was a man in his late 40s, of considerable height, with a large, almost primitive face. He did not smile as I offered my hand to be briefly held in his. He turned towards Elizabeth. She was dressed, as always, in black. Did she understand how the contrast dramatized her paleness? That it gave of her hairstyle gave her an appearance of a nun. I saw the bear's flicker of surprise as he looked at her. My mother, who had been checking the final arrangements for lunch, arrived. She received a bow from him and a polite acknowledgment of her outstretched hand. Sir Charles Harding complimented her on the beauty of the roses. My mother glowed to this tribute to her secret passion. Just as they seemed to delineate certain parameters of the room, the roses also seemed to structure my mother's week. Each Monday and Thursday, they were ritualistically placed by her into their dark green porcelain prison. Park Director Riggers, perpetual flowering, and as masculine in the tall erectness of their habit as they were in their name. In a small room off the kitchen, canvas-gloved, twice a week she picked from her surgical array of instruments secateurs that sharply cut the exact predetermined length, each helpless victim, as it lay on its shiny chrome operating table. Then she took off a small, sharp, dagger-like knife and neatly made a half-inch wound at the base of each green stem. In her soft cashmere sweater and her sensible skirts, sometimes still in her Panama hat, she would have presented to a loving daughter a vision of matronly serenity, engaged in that most soothing of activities, flower arranging. Now the ever-perfect hostess, she led us all through to lunch. I can assure you all, said Sir Charles, seated on my mother's right, that I have no intention of pursuing this bid if it's unacceptable to you. He paused. It is not my way. His voice was strange, its intonation slightly clipped and abrupt. Of course, Sir Charles, said my father. We appreciate you saying that, but we have considered the matter. We're content with the decision we made last week. Concerning the name? Yes, as I said to your board, Sir Charles continued, that's not a problem, nor will it ever be. We can make it a fundamental issue in the drawing up of the heads of agreement. I understand family attachments to business. Is one of my favorite books. The abruptness of the reply made his agreement almost a rejection. He turned towards Elizabeth. Sister Elizabeth, the tragic widow, infinitely more interesting than Ruth, by the very fact of her grief and the way she bore it. Madame Bathus? Elizabeth, please. Thank you, Elizabeth. His voice gave an almost extra E to her name. And a strong lilt to the Beth. The name became music, whereas mine was short, sharp beat on the air. Elizabeth spoke quietly, as always. I'm happy that the name will continue. Our grandparents would have wanted that. Father tells us the management believes that your company is the right one for them. A sort of marriage, perhaps, I interjected. I wanted to break their communion. Yes, Sir Charles was a man of few words. With the dominant partner, of course, I pressed him. Of course. Is that your philosophy of business and marriage? It is, Miss Garton. Oh, Ruth, please. Thank you, Ruth. Ruth, quick beat, harsh. We're discussing worldly matters, and in world to dominate, Sir Charles smiled, slightly. That's not a fashionable view, I replied. Indeed not. Marriage, however, is not only a worldly place. Women rule in its real kingdom. Go on, my father said. It's my assessment that sometimes women misunderstand. They throw it all away. They're the center of life. They hold its core. Yet they battle to be on the periphery of the world. And if in time they dominate the world? I asked, smiling. Ah, well, they'll find it a very empty prize. Which of us has his desire? Or having it is satisfied, I quoted. He looked puzzled. It's Thackeray. I said, Vanity Fair, I assume? Yes, Sir Charles. I was not certain who had won at that point. A more cynical voice than man, Thackeray appeals to you more, I feel. Damn. And how does Lady Harding feel about her place in the world and life? Lady Harding is dead. Elizabeth turned slightly towards him. I watched their eyes meet. The banality of the power of pain was clear to me again. I'm so sorry, I said. Ruth couldn't possibly have known. I'm sure Sir Charles understands that. Thank you, Elizabeth. Silently. Of course, there's no need to apologize. Sir Charles, you want us as a family to sell all our shares, not just the proportion which would give you control. My father was anxious, as always, to get back onto a less dangerous topic than men, women, life, and death. The worldly world was a place he could manage. The discussion continued, discreet, polite, and very firm on Sir Charles's part. Dominic arrived for tea and to collect me. We had arranged to attend a concert with his parents, who were on a short visit to London. I must leave the arena then, Sir Charles. We shook hands. You've already made your position clear, Ruth, as I guess you normally do. I smiled briefly and left. I had spoken of an arena other than that of business. Could he guess? Hours later, Dominic lay on me and whispered love again and again. Perhaps the music in his own head made him deaf to my silence. Ruth, a downbeat on the phone a week later. I feel I met when we met last Sunday. Perhaps you and Dominic would care to have dinner with me next Thursday. I waited, always wisest. He was uncertain of himself. No doubt an unusual experience for him. He came, perhaps knowingly, into the trap. I felt it inappropriate. After all, she's a widow? Yes, a grieving widow. Indeed, indeed. Of course not. Oh dear, I've embarrassed you. I'm so sorry. The entire undertaking was ill-conceived. Undertaking? Hardly an undertaking, Sir Charles. Simply an invitation. I must speak to... Oh, good. The relief in his voice was noted by me. Elizabeth, I'll leave to you, I said. Absolutely, he replied. Till Thursday, then. Till then. Dominic, as always, was easy to persuade. Oh, kind face, brilliant mind. Oh, beautiful straw-colored hair. Young man's body, why did you do this to yourself? Why me? We drove towards a small restaurant in Mayfair, an unsurprising choice and therefore, in its way, a soothing one. I gazed at the creamy silk reflection of myself in the car's side window. I could safely assume that Elizabeth would be in black. I felt that Charles Harding's memory of his first dinner with Elizabeth should contain in its shadows my ivory-clothed figure. I thought how important it was to dress the part, even when forced to wait in the wings. Sir Charles was there before us. Elizabeth, by accident, of course, was late. We sipped our drinks, and I felt him absorb my beauty with some interest as he waited for the arrival of the one for whom the dinner was really intended. Grave, stark, with a graceful, understated apology, Elizabeth sat down. Sir Charles had maneuvered himself into our lives. I guessed that he rarely wasted time, and that the dinner would be the first of many. I sat beside him. Elizabeth and Dominic sat opposite. Dominic trapped, and Elizabeth less free than she knew. Elizabeth, believing herself to be part of a family outing, relaxed even though enough over dinner to entrance Charles Harding. I listened as she answered his delicately phrased inquiries. Yes, I've kept my studio. I go there to paint every day. Dominic once explained to me in mathematical terms the beauty of its proportions, but I love it for its light, all of which comes through the skylight. So I'm undistracted by windows onto gardens or onto other houses. It's perhaps unkind for me to say so, but I find solitude even more important now. Why unkind? Oh, because everyone, my parents, Dominic, Ruth in particular, have been so very supportive and good to me. And of course, my darling son, Stephen, who has tried so hard to comfort me. It seems wrong, unfeeling in the face of all this love to say that I need to be alone. And your paintings, what are you painting now? Nothing. Nothing? But I thought you said that you went there to paint. Yes, that's true. I go to there to paint, but I do not. I didn't know this. Will I ever know you, Elizabeth? Why not? Sir Charles asked. I don't know, but I know it's right that I should go there every day. And one day it will be the right day. Sir Charles cleared his throat, touched, no doubt. So what do you do there? I sit and wait. For inspiration, I asked. This really had gone on long enough. I waited for the thing that is right for me to paint. Why not continue with I remember Hubert's phrase, enchantment? Because that would imply that Hubert's death had not changed me. We were all silent. I must stop now. I've spoken more about me than is your wont. Yes. Well, here's to waiting for what is right. Sir Charles raised his glass. I watched him drink her in, and I looked at Dominic, who innocently raised his glass to me and clearly didn't taste the pain. Tell me about Charles Harding. Helen and I were having lunch. Why? Didn't you know he's trying to buy Alpha? Does that matter to you? You've never expressed an interest in the company before. Let's just say I'm a hidden sort of person, I laughed. I don't really know him all that well. You know him better than I do, so give me some idea. Well, he's feared. By whom? In publishing, of course, and in the city. Why? He's very brilliant intellectually. First from Oxford. And he's supposed to be a ruthless businessman. Is he? No, not really. He's just successful beyond the laws of probability. God spare me the mathematical phrases. I'm not in Dominic's league. Helen, when I see you gazing out at me from the TV, analyzing this or that company's results, I cannot help remembering the schoolgirl who traded her math prep for whatever perfume or lipstick she lusted after. Never yours, darling. You are always too pristine for such adolescent decorations. And anyway, Helen, I prefer to do my own prep. As now? What do you mean? You're doing prep on Charles Harding. Well, I said, he may be about to take us over. Helen was as close to the concept of a friend as I ever had, which was why I was particularly guarded around her. She had red, wavy hair and sharp gray-green eyes. When she widened them during an interview, they made her most lethal question sound benign. She had a certain female power much admired by women in my time, and used the gifts of nature to enhance a considerable intelligence for the simple purpose of undermining powerful men. She was excellent at her job, filled with lust with some malice, and succumbed, I guess, with little pleasure. Our relationship had an element of mutual admiration and competition. Did you know his wife? Felicity? Not really. I met her on just a few occasions, when she was being the token wife, which she always did well, incidentally. She died 4 years ago. How did she die? There was a long illness, a weak heart, I think, though the end was very sudden. Children? 1, grown up. I think he lives in America. It was a long marriage. There was never any scandal that I heard of. Charles Harding is not one for the gossip columnist. Far too clever for that, of course. There could be some secret, but she paused. On the surface, it looks, my dear, as though what you see is what you get. Tycoon, widowed. I knew Helen well enough to have noted the pause and the equivocating words. On the surface, what do you mean? She sat back in her chair and then looked at me, a kind of question in her eyes. She sighed. Can I trust you, Ruth? This is really utterly confidential. I nodded. She paused and began to speak quietly. In the year before Felicity died, she had, remember, been ill for some time. He had a short affair with a young woman. She was insanely in love. It was all extraordinarily intense, I gather. Very sexual, I would imagine. Anyway, I knew her parents. It was all hushed up. Her father's the Queen's Counsel, has enormous influence. And Charles Harding, well, he was utterly devastated, blamed himself entirely. Felicity died shortly afterwards. It was a double blow to a man who, I'd guess, had felt himself capable of handling anything and anyone. I imagine he still feels very guilty. Now I understood Elizabeth's attraction for him. She would be the perfect balm for a guilty soul. But what of the other side of Charles Harding, the intensely sexual? Was that for Elizabeth too? Well, perhaps he'll meet a good woman, I smiled at Helen. I wanted to break the air of increasing intimacy between us. She took the bait and became the public Helen. There aren't many of those about, she smiled back at me. Oh, yes, there are. They're just as lethal. And lot. Gloucestershire, whatever, for Sunday lunch. He would come bearing gifts. We would come bearing gifts. More precisely, the gift of Elizabeth. He would beware. Dominic and I drove in silence. Earlier, we had had another conversation about our marriage. He had lain beside me, physically satisfied or finished, whichever. Some lonely sensuality draining from his face. His blond hair fell limply across his forehead. His eyes, without his glasses, seemed somehow out of focus as he stroked my hair and whispered, Ruth, you're breaking my heart. I sighed. You've got what you wanted, me. We should not try to take what we know is not ours, even if by some miracle it becomes available to us. Do you know what a catastrophe is, Ruth? I think so. No, in mathematics. Do you know what the word catastrophe means in mathematics? No. It means a system that disturbs another. You have disturbed me. You've invaded me. Indeed. Well, there are other invasions. I rose to shower. After the invasion, modern moves, so hygienic. We have too many of these conversations. My memory faded. We were now in the car. Maybe you did pursue me, Dominic, and I'm not breaking any promises. Look, it's a beautiful day. Let's enjoy it. It will be interesting to see Sir Charles on home ground. I was anxious not to have an obvious tension between Dominic and me. So unattractive, so demeaning. In front of Charles. So I placated him. A woman adored, and of course I was, can do anything. Particularly when she makes a few mistakes. We were balanced, his love, my coldness. I wondered if Dominic understood how much he needed the agony. Probably not. Charles Harding's house, Frimpton Manor Farm, disconcerted me. Just outside the Cotswold village, it was a low-built stone 17th-century mansion. In place of the grandeur and opulence I had expected, the house exuded a mellowness and peace. It rested behind a row of chestnut trees, which marked a sort of terrace at the end of short poplar drive. He stood in the stone porch to greet us. Then he led us into a low-ceilinged drawing room in which a roaring fire, deep armchairs, and an old carpet on a dark wooden floor all painted an image of the slow seduction of older times, and did so authentically. The house was not a lie. It was itself in structure, decoration, and odor. And if ghosts haunted it, I wondered if it was because they were at ease there, and perhaps found heaven a little bright. The polite cliches began. "How long have you lived here?" I asked. "Since I was a boy." "How lovely. Oh, God." "When did your family acquire it?" "My father bought it when he married." A pause. He was polite, but bored. I didn't blame him. Another car arrived. In a minute, Elizabeth stood in the porch. I watched his face tense. He was no longer bored. I wish I didn't know these things. Elizabeth and Black again shook hands briefly, then kissed me. Oh, those false sisterly kisses. False sister. Within 15 minutes or so, my parents had arrived. We ate a simple lunch, served by a couple who seemed as much part of the house as the old silver and plain white linen napkins. Afterwards, we sat in a small sitting room for coffee. A portrait of a dark woman in a blue velvet dress gazed down at us. Surprisingly, it was Elizabeth who commented on its beauty. "It's a portrait of my wife," he said. A little silence. "It's 4 years now since she died." Murmurs of sympathy, polite, of no greater intensity or sincerity than an apology for disturbing someone who had been sleeping. "So sorry, did I disturb you?" Nothing could disturb the subject of a portrait any more. I wondered, had Felicity ever disturbed Sir Charles, other than in death? Felicity loved this house. She loved country life, rarely came to London. And you? In those days I liked applause. When I was younger, London seemed a better place to find it than here. "Well, you've been much applauded," my father spoke. "A little, in my own world. And internationally, your work for—" Father mentioned an international charity for refugees. More desultory talk of success and its necessary companion, adherence to a good cause. Slowly Sir Charles allowed a portrait, a most attractive portrait, to be painted of himself, for Elizabeth, surrounded by her family. And as he stalked her, I stalked him. I was not certain, watching him, which of us was had more practice. Did Elizabeth remind him of Felicity? There was no physical resemblance. Felicity's portrait was of a petite, dark-haired woman in a blue dress. But other qualities, perhaps? Spiritual qualities? Who can tell? Memories, the living with them and the killing of them, blurs so much of daily life. We picked today's bouquet of feelings, sounds, and smells for tomorrow's contemplation. Tomorrow Sir Charles Harding would add today's miscellany to his gathered images of the past, and perhaps they would include me. And that's where we're gonna stop today. Tell me what you all think of this Sir Charles Harding in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time. Bye, guys.